Like it's 11 a.m., so you can be awake. It's okay. First and foremost, this is my first time at South by, and up until 2 days ago, I kept calling it South by Southwest, like a noob, but everyone calls it South by, so. I just wanted to say thank you so much to the South by team for bringing me out here and having me speak in front of all of you guys. I'm so excited and so honored to be here. This is really like a check on my bucket list, just cross, all that good stuff. I always like to start off my story by telling you a little bit about where I came from. So I grew up in a small, very conservative, very white town called La Plata, Maryland, where I walked into my first grade class and I sat down next to the only other girl who had dark brown hair and asked her if she was Muslim too, because I had never seen another girl with dark brown hair. And she looked at me kind of funny and said, "Am I what?" And from that day on and for the next 10 years, I would go through this paralyzing identity crisis. When I would have to fill out forms that would ask if we spoke a second language at home, and my mom wrote down that we spoke Arabic, I would put my form at the bottom of the pile so that no one would know that I spoke Arabic. And when my mom would come and chaperone or volunteer, she was a guidance counselor at school, and people would ask me why she wore that thing on her head, I would just say, I don't know. And whenever we would get presents for Eid, which is the Muslim equivalent to Christmas, I would save my presents until Christmas time and wait until then to use them because I wanted everyone else to think I celebrated Christmas too. And so this went on until I was about 15, where my biggest insecurity was the color of my hair and the color of my eyes. I used to I would have like these blonde streaks in my hair, and I'd wear colored contacts, and I'm not going to show you a photo of that because it's not as cute as my baby pictures. But that went on until I was about 15, where we moved right outside of Washington, D.C., and I experienced my own sense of culture shock. I saw people expressing themselves and embracing their identities in ways that I had never seen before. And I kind of thought to myself, well, if they can do that, then why can't I? And I impulsively decided to put on the hijab. Now, I can't tell you about the first time I put it on, maybe because that was when I was 1 year old and it wasn't when I started putting it on like full time, but I can't even tell you when I started putting it on full time, like why I did it. But it really came down to the fact that I was so desperate to figure out myself and my identity and essentially put on myself. And so the first way that I kind of started on this journey of just influencing impact was really putting on for myself. And I realized that I was still really set on doing what it is that I had always wanted to do. And so I had known from a very young age that I wanted to become a storyteller, a journalist. I wanted to become essentially Oprah. But for years I had thought because I wanted to become Oprah, I would never put on the hijab because in order for me to be on television, I couldn't do that. Nobody else had ever done it before, and you just had to look like everybody else on TV, and I wanted to strive for that. So now I was in this position where I had this thing on my head, and I was just like, okay, am I still going to be able to do this? And so I remember talking to my mom about how I really wanted to get a head start because I knew that it was going to be hard for me to get a job. So we were sitting in the car one day after I had taken a test to get into our community college for a concurrent enrollment program, and I got into an honors program, and my mom looked at me and was like, why don't you just start college early and get yourself a head start? And so that fall, I ended up starting college at 16, simply for the reason that I was really competitive and I didn't want to waste any time if I knew if it was gonna be harder for me to get the job. But the first day of school, or college, I told myself that I was going to leave all of those insecurities about identity behind, no matter how much they were still prevalent, and really become who I always was or who I was meant to be, and pursue anything and everything that ignited any type of fire or passion inside of me, and really become this all-encompassing person that epitomized the personal legend that I felt I had. I like to say that that is what that person looked like to me at the time. But I went in, and the first person I met in college was a poet. And the reason that was so special to me was because when I was in middle school and high school, my English teacher would bring up the poetry unit every semester, and our class would have this collective groan, and they would say, "Oh man, poetry is so lame." And I remember thinking to myself, like, "Oh, I love poetry," but I would join in that collective groan of, "Oh man, poetry is so lame." And so the first person I meet in college is a poet, and he had this sense of confidence I had never seen before, and he really just knew exactly who he was, and I wanted to do just that. And so from that day on, I took on everything and anything that I had an interest in, whatever club it was, whatever activity it was. And I ended up starting to perform poetry. And when I did that, I remember it was World AIDS Day, and I had just turned 18, so I was finally able to get like a job or an internship, like a real job or an internship. And I had a performance for poetry performance, and I came up on stage and I introduced myself as a broadcast journalism major. And I wasn't a broadcast journalism major yet, but I got a kick out of telling people that I was, because I wanted people to get familiar with someone who looked like me, being on TV. And I would like every single time I would introduce myself and be like, "Yeah, my name is North Square, I'm a broadcast journalism major." And then they're like, "Oh, broadcast. So like you want to write?" And I was like, no, like on television. And they'd be like, "But," and I'd be like, "Yeah, exactly." And I would always get a kick out of the reaction that people would have. So I introduced myself as a broadcast journalism major. And the night before I had this poetry performance, I had prayed what we call in Islam istikhara, which is the guidance prayer. And I was looking for an internship or a job for the spring, because I had gotten a full ride the following fall for journalism school, and pretty much just said, "Hey God, I really need an internship or a job. Can you help me out? Okay, thanks, love you, bye." And the next morning I had this performance, introduced myself, and afterwards a woman came up on stage and took the mic out of my hand, and in front of everyone looked at me and said, "Noor, you're a broadcast journalism major?" And I was like, "Oh crap, she knows I'm lying. Like, what am I gonna do?" And I just said, "Yeah." And she said, "Well, my name is Justine Love, and I'm the Director of Community and Public Affairs at CBS Radio, and I want you to intern for us." And I remember just thinking, well, first I was like, thanks, God, for the hookup. But I remember just thinking to myself, okay, telling people who I was, and taking on this identity, like, again, maybe I really can do this. And this internship kind of solidified that confidence for me and that validation that I was looking for. But I still wanted to ask journalists themselves, and so I started obsessively shadowing other journalists, and going by their work and spending the days with them. And I would ask them the same question at the end every single time, like, "Do you think I can do this?" And some people would say, "Yeah, sure, whatever." And some people would say, "Honestly, probably not. Like, do you think you could take off the scarf for TV and then put it back on after?" And I was like, "That's not really how it works, but thanks anyway." And some people were really just like, "Yeah, it needs to happen. Like, this hasn't happened yet, and if it's going to happen, it's going to be now." And so one of the journalists that I ended up shadowing was a local news reporter. And while I was shadowing her, she snapped this photo of me on the anchor desk. And that night, I went home and I posted this on Facebook, and I said, "This is what my dream looks like, and I'm going to make it happen." They call it the law of attraction, I think, and the power of visualization. And I thanked my family and friends who had supported me since I was a kid for doing this.